I kept this love for 34 years and never touched her once. I'm here in room 12 at St. Vincent's Hospital, surrounded by machines that make more noise than my voice. These tubes in my nose, the IV dripping slowly. My kids stopped coming 3 weeks ago. They say I'm talking nonsense when I mention the nun, that it's just confused old man talk. But you folks listening to me now, you'll understand. If you've ever had a love you had to keep secret, if you know what it's like to carry a feeling that nobody can know about, let me know you're out there so I know I'm not talking to myself. This shoebox here next to my bed, it's been with me since 1987. Inside are 3 things worth more than everything I built in my life: a medal of Our Lady, a faded photo, and a letter I only opened 3 years ago. It's the story of my love for Sister Margaret. And before I leave this world, I need to tell someone, because some loves are too big to die with us. Let me take you back in time. It was March 1983. I was 47 years old and had just buried my Catherine. Cancer took her in 2 months. Left me and 3 little kids in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. I was drinking every day. Left the children crying, food burning on the stove. Couldn't even brush my teeth right. The pain was so deep that I thought, how do you keep living when half your soul goes away? It was on a rainy morning just like today that she appeared. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks on the door. I opened it looking like a mess, wearing slippers and a dirty shirt. And there she was. A nun I'd never seen before, carrying a steaming pot. Good morning, Mr. Williams. I'm Sister Margaret. I came because Catherine asked me to. I looked at her without understanding. What do you mean, sister? My wife died a month ago. She smiled in that way that only very good people know how to smile. Her green eyes sparkled in the morning light. She appeared to me in a dream, Mr. Williams, said the boys needed some hot soup and you needed someone to talk to. Folks, I know it sounds crazy, but right then, for the first time since I buried my Catherine, I felt like someone cared. It wasn't pity. It was real care. May I come in? I brought chicken soup. It was her favorite, wasn't it? How did she know? Catherine was never much of a churchgoer, but I let her in, and when the smell of that soup filled the kitchen, the kids came running for the first time in weeks. Junior, 8 years old, Marcia, 6, and little Charlie, only 4. Dad, who's the lady? Asked Junior, shy. This is Sister Margaret, sweethearts. I came to visit you. And you know what happened? For the first time in a month, my children smiled, really smiled. Not that forced smile kids make when they're sad but trying to please. It was a genuine happy kid smile. That day she stayed for 2 hours, served soup, helped clean the kitchen, sat on the floor to play with the little ones. And when she left, the house felt different, like she had blessed every corner. Mr. Williams, she said at the door, I'll come back next week, if that's all right with you. I just nodded, didn't know what to say. For 2 years, Sister Margaret came to our house every Wednesday, regular as clockwork. She always arrived after lunch with something in her hand, sometimes homemade bread, sometimes school supplies for the boys, sometimes just a warm smile. And listen, she wasn't like the other nuns I knew. She didn't keep saying everything was God's will, didn't quote Bible verses all the time. She talked about real life, asked how work was going, if the boys were doing well in school, if I was managing to sleep. It was gradually that I started noticing her, as a woman, you know. Not that I wanted to. I swear I fought against it. But how could I not notice? She had a way of laughing that lit up the whole house. When the boys got into mischief, she didn't scold them. She'd laugh along and then explain things with a patience I'd never seen. And her eyes. Lord, those green eyes of hers. One day, Charlie spilled oatmeal on his school uniform. Cried like he was lost, thinking he was going to get in trouble. She knelt down to his level, cleaned his little face with the edge of her habit and said, Charlie, honey, oatmeal comes out with warm water. Sadness comes out too. But sometimes it takes longer. That's when I knew I was done for. In love with the town's nun. Just picture the situation. Me, a widower for 2 years, falling in love with the bride of Christ. If I told anyone, they'd say I'd lost my mind completely. But the worst part is I started suspecting she felt something too. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't watching, and when our eyes met, she'd blush and look away quickly. Other times, when she was helping in the kitchen and I'd come close to get something, I could feel her tremble slightly. It wasn't my imagination. A man knows when a woman gets nervous around him. Let me tell you about the day that changed everything. It was a Wednesday in October, I remember it clearly. Sister Margaret was in the kitchen helping the boys with their homework when the weather started getting nasty outside. The wind was shaking the trees like crazy, and when it started raining, it was one of those end-of-the-world storms. The boys ran to their room, scared by the thunder. "Sister, you better stay until this passes," I said. "This rain's not fit for anyone to be walking in." She agreed, and we stayed in the kitchen, just the two of us. She finished washing the dishes while I tried to get the oil lamp working. The power had gone out. That's when lightning struck. Folks, it was a sound that could wake the dead. The whole house shook, and for about 3 seconds, that white light lit up everything. And in that moment, without thinking, without planning, I took her hand. She was scared of the noise, I was too, and it was pure instinct. I held Sister Margaret's hand and didn't let go. What happened next I remember like it was yesterday. She looked me in the eyes, with that lightning still flashing outside the window, and whispered, "Joshua, some feelings are bigger than we are." 3 seconds. It was only 3 seconds that she let me hold her hand, but in those 3 seconds, I lived a whole lifetime. I felt her heart beating, felt her soft skin, felt that there was a real woman underneath that habit. Then she slowly pulled away and whispered a prayer, but I was certain she felt for me what I felt for her. The storm passed, she left, and we never spoke about that night again. But everything changed. In the weeks that followed, whenever she came over, there was a different feeling in the air. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a sweet tension, you know, like we had a secret that only we knew. It was a few months after the storm that Sister Margaret started opening up to me. I don't know if it was because she trusted me or if she needed someone to talk to, but she started telling me pieces of her life. "Joshua," she said on just another Wednesday, while peeling potatoes in my kitchen, "I wasn't born wanting to be a nun." I put down my newspaper and paid attention. I was 18 when my father wanted to marry me off to a 45-year-old man, a wealthy farmer, friend of his. I barely knew the man, but everything was already arranged. She kept peeling potatoes, but I could see she was stirred up inside. That's when I ran away, ran to the church and begged the Mother Superior to protect me. She said the only way was for me to take my vows, and I did. But sometimes I wonder what, sister?" She stopped, looked at me and said quietly, What if I'd had the courage to run somewhere else? What if I'd chosen a different life?" Folks, when she said that, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest, because I understood what she was trying to say. She was telling me she regretted the choice she'd made. "But are you happy being a nun?" I asked, trying not to show what I was feeling. She took a while to answer, spent about 2 minutes just peeling potatoes in silence. "I love God, Joshua. I love taking care of the orphanage children. I love helping those who need it. But some days I look at families like yours and think, what would it be like to have a family of my own?" There it was. The message was clear. Without saying it directly, she'd told me that sometimes she dreamed of a different life, a life that maybe could include someone like me. From that day on, our conversations became more personal. She told me about the strictness of convent life. I told her about missing Catherine. We built a friendship that was more than friendship, but could never be declared love, because we both knew there was no future. She had taken a vow of chastity. I was a widower with 3 small children, and even if she left the sisterhood, which was nearly impossible back then, the whole town would turn against both of us. But you know how it is. The heart doesn't ask permission. It simply loves. In January 1987, Sister Margaret arrived at my house with a different expression. Sad. I knew right away it wasn't good news. "Joshua, I need to talk to you." The boys were playing in the backyard. She sat at the kitchen table in her usual spot, but this time kept fidgeting with her rosary. "The bishop is transferring me. I'm going to Rochester, to work at the sisters' hospital there." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. When? Next week. Next week. 4 years of companionship were going to end in 1 week. But why, sister? Did you do something wrong? She smiled sadly. No, Joshua, I didn't do anything wrong. But maybe I felt things I shouldn't have felt. There it was. Right there she confirmed everything I'd suspected. Her feelings for me had reached someone's ears. Maybe one of the other sisters noticed the way she looked at me. Maybe someone saw us talking too close together. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was going to lose her. Sister, Don't say anything, Joshua, please. She took something from her bag, a medal of Our Lady and a small photo of herself, tucked between the pages of her prayer book. I want you to keep these, the medal to protect you and the photo, so you don't forget that there's love in the world. Folks, when she said love, the tears came down on their own. It wasn't friendship anymore. It wasn't pastoral care anymore. It was real love, declared without being declared. Promise me something, Joshua. Anything, sister. Promise you'll allow yourself to be happy again, that you'll find a good woman for the boys, that you'll build a new family. Promise? I promised, but it was a lie. How was I going to love another person after discovering I could love this deeply? The following Sunday after Mass, she said goodbye to the boys. Each one got a little kiss on the forehead and a blessing. They cried because they'd gotten used to that caring presence. With me, she just shook my hand and said, "Thank you for letting me be part of your family," and she left. I stood at the door watching her bus disappear down the road, and I knew a part of me had gone with it. After Sister Margaret left, I kept the promise I made to her. Sort of. I raised the 3 boys alone, worked myself to the bone, put all 3 through college, but I never married again. Some interested women showed up, especially when the boys grew up and I was alone. But it didn't work out. I compared them all to her, and nobody came close. The medal she gave me I always carried in my pocket. The photo stayed hidden in my drawer, wrapped in tissue paper. And every Sunday, without fail, I went to the 9 o'clock Mass and prayed for her, asked God to take care of her, for her to be happy in her new life. The years went by. The boys got married, had children, moved to the big city, and I grew old alone in that house that once was full of life. You folks listening to me, tell me something. Do you think it's possible to love someone for 30 years without ever seeing them again? Because I did. Every single day of those 30 years, I woke up thinking about her and went to sleep praying for her. There were days I'd go to church just to sit in the pew where she used to sit during Mass. There were nights I'd dream about her and wake up thinking she was right there beside me. Once in 2010, I even traveled to Rochester, but didn't have the courage to look for the hospital where she worked. What was I going to say? Hi, sister. Remember me? I'm that widower who fell in love with you 23 years ago. It made no sense. But in 2015, I started getting worried. I was 79, my health wasn't what it used to be, and I thought, what if I die without knowing how she is? That's when I started asking Father Anthony, carefully, if he had news from sisters in other cities. Said it was just curiosity, nostalgia for the old days, until 2017 when he gave me the worst news of my life. Mr. Williams, said Father Anthony after Sunday Mass, you knew Sister Margaret who worked here in the 80s pretty well, didn't you? My heart started racing. I did, Father. Why? I got a letter from the Mother Superior in Rochester. Sister Margaret is very sick, stomach cancer already spread. The doctors gave her only a few months. Folks, it was like my world collapsed. The woman I'd loved my whole life was dying, and there was nothing I could do. The treatments are very expensive, the priest continued. The congregation is doing fundraisers, asking for donations. How much do they need, Father? They estimated about $75,000 for the next year and a half of treatment. $75,000. It was exactly what my small farm was worth, the property I'd inherited from my mother. The land I was saving for my grandchildren. I didn't think twice. Father Anthony, I want to help, but it has to be anonymous, okay? I don't want anyone to know it was me. I sold the property within a week, gave all the money to the priest, who sent it to the Mother Superior saying it was from an anonymous benefactor from our parish. It was my way of taking care of her from afar. If I couldn't be by her side during her illness, at least I could pay for her to have the best possible treatment. For a year and a half, I funded everything: medicine, hospital stays, private doctors. I spent exactly the $75,000, had to dip into my savings too. My children were furious when they found out. Said I was wasting their inheritance on old man fantasies, that it was crazy to donate so much money to a nun I barely knew. How could I explain that I knew her better than anyone in the world, that she had been the love of my life? They wouldn't understand. They never understood. In March 2018, Father Anthony called me into the sacristy after Mass. "Mr. Williams, Sister Margaret passed away yesterday morning." I'd been expecting this news for weeks, but it still felt like a punch to the chest. She was gone, and I'd never see her again. "The burial is tomorrow in Rochester," said the priest. "The Mother Superior asked me to let you know because of the donations our parish made." "Father, can I go?" He looked at me with those eyes of someone who understands more than they say. "Of course you can, Mr. Williams. In fact, I think you should." The next day, I took the 6 a.m. bus. It was 150 miles to Rochester, 2.5 hours of travel that felt like 2 days. I didn't drive anymore. My eyesight wasn't good enough. I arrived at the cemetery right as the burial was starting. I stayed hidden behind a tree, watching from a distance. There were about 50 people. Other nuns, some families she must have helped, children from the orphanage. When I saw the coffin being lowered, folks, it was the strongest pain I'd ever felt in my life. Worse than when I lost Catherine. Because when Catherine died, at least I could say goodbye, could hold her hand, could tell her I loved her. With Sister Margaret, I never could say it. When everyone left, I walked to the grave. I knelt on the still, fresh earth and spoke quietly. "Sister Margaret, I know you can't hear me, but I need to say this. I loved you for 31 years. Every day. You were the most beautiful and most impossible love of my life. Thank you for taking care of me and my boys. Thank you for teaching me that pure love exists in this world." When I stood up to leave, a young nun approached me. "Excuse me, are you Joshua?" I nearly fell over. "I am. How do you know?" "Sister Margaret talked about you often, especially in her last months when she was sicker. She asked me to give this to you if you came to the burial." And she handed me a letter from Sister Margaret. For me. I got home and couldn't bring myself to open the letter right away. I left it on the kitchen table and just stared at it. It was a small letter, handwritten in her familiar handwriting. I only opened it 3 days later. Let me read you some parts. "My dear Joshua, if you're reading this, it's because God allowed us one last meeting. I want you to know that you were the man I loved most in my life. It wasn't sin, it was blessing. You taught me it's possible to love God and love a person at the same time. During all these years, 34 in total, not a single day passed without me thinking about you and the boys. I cared for hundreds of orphaned children while thinking about your sons. I prayed for you every morning and every night. I know it was you who paid for my treatment. The Mother Superior told me at the end when I insisted I needed to know. I cried, Joshua. I cried because even from so far away, even after so much time, you were still taking care of me. I want you to know that I died in peace, knowing I was loved by the best man I ever knew. And I want you to live in peace too, knowing that our love was real, was pure, and was blessed by God. See you on the other side, my love. There we'll be able to talk forever. With all my heart, Margaret. Folks, when I finished reading, I cried like a child. I cried from sadness, from relief, from joy, all mixed together. For 31 years I carried the doubt. Did she remember me? Did she feel for me what I felt for her? Had our love been real or just my imagination? And in that letter, she answered everything. She loved me too, the same way I loved her. For 34 years, we both loved in silence, each in our own city, each in our own life, but with our hearts connected by an invisible thread. After I received the letter, I wanted to tell someone. I'd kept this secret for too long. I called my 3 children for a talk a few years later. Dad, what's this story about a nun? said Junior, already irritated before I even started. "You're getting a little, you know what I mean, right?" "A little what, son?" "A little confused, Dad. Every time we come here you keep talking about this Sister Margaret. We don't even know this woman." I tried to explain. I told them about the 4 years she took care of our family, about how she helped raise them after their mother died. But they didn't remember well and they were too little. "Okay, Dad, she helped us when we were kids. But going from that to being obsessed with a nun..." "It's not obsession, Marcia. It's love." "Love?" Charlie gave a bitter laugh. "Dad, with all due respect, but you were 47, she was a nun. What kind of love is that? How do I explain to them that love has no age, no profession, no rules? How do I tell them that you can love someone for 30 years without ever touching them? Do you think that, because I'm old, my feelings aren't real?" "It's not that, Dad." Marcia tried to be gentler. "It's just that you spent almost $75,000 on this woman. Money that was ours, the grandchildren's. And that's when I lost it. For the first time in my life, I had a real fight with my children. It was my money, my property, my savings, and I spent it on who I wanted, on the woman I loved. But Dad, but nothing. Do you think that after 60 we can't feel anything anymore? That we have to become walking corpses, only good for giving money to our kids and babysitting grandchildren?" It was an ugly fight. They left the house without saying goodbye properly, and since then they visit less and less. They think I have dementia, that this story about the nun is some lonely old man's fantasy. That's why I'm here alone in this hospital. That's why they stop coming when I talk about her. But I don't regret anything. Not loving her, not spending my money to save her life, not keeping this love for 34 years. You folks who've listened to me this far, let me share with you what I learned about love in these 82 years of life. First, true love doesn't need possession. I never kissed Sister Margaret, never slept with her, never lived with her. But I loved her more than many people who love officially. Love isn't about having, it's about feeling. Second, love has no expiration date. Young people think love is for the young, that after 40 we can only care about TV shows and medicine. Wrong. I loved until my final days, and it was a strong, true love that made me wake up every day wanting to live. Third, some loves are sacred even when impossible. What I felt for Sister Margaret made me a better person. It taught me patience, taught me to care for others, taught me that you can be happy just knowing the person you love is well, even far away. And finally, true love brings no shame. No matter the age, no matter the circumstances. When it's pure, when it's true, it's always beautiful. I know my children get embarrassed when I tell this story. They think it's ridiculous for an old man to have fallen in love with a nun. But I'm not ashamed at all. And I want to make something very clear to those listening to me. Catherine was my first love. Margaret was my last. There was no betrayal, no dishonor. Our hearts are big, folks. They can hold more than one love in a lifetime. And each love is different, each love teaches us something. Joshua Williams lived a true love, a love that survived time, distance, death. And that's not a reason for shame, it's a reason for pride. Now here in this hospital bed with all these machines, I feel a peace I hadn't felt in years. You know why? Because I finally told the story. After 34 years keeping this love secret, I spoke up. To you who are listening to me, to the whole world. Sister Margaret and I loved each other. It was an impossible love, but it was real, it was pure. It was the kind of love that makes you believe there are sacred things in this life. Last night, I dreamed about her. She was young again, with those green eyes shining. She held my hand, this time without letting go, and said, "Joshua, thank you for loving me the right way." "What do you mean, sister?" "You loved me without possessing me. You loved me without harming me. You loved me without ruining my calling. That's the most beautiful love there is. And you know what else she said in the dream? Now you can come. Here we can be together without hurting anyone. I'm ready. I raised my children, worked honestly, helped those who needed it. And I loved. I loved with all my strength, even knowing I couldn't have her. Her medal is here around my neck. Her photo is in my hand. And the letter I know by heart now. See you on the other side, my love. There we'll be able to talk forever. Before I say goodbye to you folks, I want to make something very clear. This story isn't about some perverted old man who fell in love with a nun. This story is about how true love transforms us. Because of the love I felt for Sister Margaret, I became a better father to my children. I learned to be patient, to cook, to take care of the house. She taught me all that in the 4 years we knew each other. Because of this love, I became a more generous person. I spent everything I had to save her life, and I don't regret a penny. Because that's what love does. It makes us think first about the good of the person we love. Because of this love, I learned that you can be happy even without having. For 31 years, I was happy just knowing she existed, that she breathed, that she cared for other people somewhere in the world. And you know what was the greatest gift this love gave me? The certainty that I was capable of loving without selfishness. Many people love wanting something in return. I loved just to love. And that made me feel close to God. Now I want to ask you folks who are listening. In your families, how many love stories like this exist and nobody ever stopped to listen? How many grandfathers, how many grandmothers have loves tucked away in their hearts that their children think are old folks' nonsense? Your parents, your grandparents, they were young once too. They felt their hearts race for someone. They dreamed, they suffered for love, they lived passions that marked their entire lives. But we only see them as dad and mom, as grandpa and grandma. We forget that underneath those wrinkles, there's a whole story of feelings. Do this. When you leave here, go talk to the elderly in your family. Ask them about the loves of their youth, about dreams that didn't work out, about people who marked their lives. You'll be surprised by the stories you'll hear, and they'll be happy to be able to tell someone who really cares. Because that's what we want most when we get old. Someone who listens to our stories without judging. Someone who understands that our feelings are real, even if we're 70, 80, 90 years old. Well, folks, I think that's it. I told everything I needed to tell. I got this weight off my chest after more than 3 decades. I know my children will be angry when they hear this recording. They'll say I'm embarrassing the family, that it's disrespectful to their mother's memory. But it's not. I loved Catherine with all my strength while she lived. I was a faithful husband, present father, true companion. The love I felt for Sister Margaret didn't diminish at all what I felt for my wife. Our hearts are big, folks. They can hold more than one love in a lifetime. And each love is different. Each love teaches us something. Look at that. It's raining again. Just like that morning in 1983 when she appeared at my door with the pot of soup. Just like the storm night when I held her hand. I think it's a sign she's calling me. Sister Margaret, if you're listening to me from somewhere, I want you to know that keeping this love for 34 years was the most beautiful thing I did in my life. You taught me that true love doesn't end, doesn't age, doesn't die. And to you folks who listened to me all the way through, thank you. Thank you for not judging me. Thank you for understanding that love has no age.